In the 1920s, a man walked into a psychology lab in Moscow. He wasn't there because something was wrong with him. He was there because his boss was annoyed. His boss kept giving him long lists of instructions, addresses, names, numbers, and he never once wrote anything down, not because he didn't care, because he didn't need to. This man could remember everything he had ever heard, seen, or read. Every conversation, every page, every face, for the rest of his life. Scientists studied him for 30 years, and what they found wasn't a gift. It was a warning. Can he ever forget? The scientist's name was Alexander Luria. The man he was studying, he'd later call simply S. Luria started small. He read S, a list of 30 random words. Numbers, nonsense syllables. S repeated them back, perfectly. So Luria made the list longer. 50 words, 70, 100. Still perfect. Luria kept testing him, not for weeks, for years. He'd bring S back after months, sometimes over a decade later, and read him lists from the very first sessions. S would close his eyes and recite them back, in order, without a single mistake. There seemed to be no edge to this man's memory, no wall he ever hit. Luria eventually stopped testing the limit because he realized there wasn't one. So how does a brain do this? The answer is strange. S's senses were tangled together. When most of us hear a sound, we just hear it. When S heard a sound, he also saw a color, tasted a flavor, felt a texture. A voice wasn't just a voice, it was yellow and crumbly, he once said. A high-pitched tone felt like a needle. This condition is called synesthesia, when your senses cross wires that are supposed to stay separate. For S, every single thing he experienced left behind not one memory trace, but 4 or 5, layered on top of each other. Sound, color, taste, touch, all locked together. That meant nothing he ever encountered could just slip away, because it wasn't stored as one fragile thread. It was stored as a knot. To remember a grocery list, most people repeat it in their head a few times and hope for the best. S didn't have to try at all. He just had to not forget, which, for him, was the hard part. At first, this made S a sensation. He quit his job as a journalist and became a performer, a professional memory man, reciting impossible lists on stage to stunned audiences. It seemed like the best superpower a person could ask for, but there was a problem no one had thought to ask about. What happens to a mind that can never take out the trash? Every sound on the street, every face in the crowd, every meaningless sentence anyone ever said to him. None of it faded. His memory didn't have a delete key. So it filled and never emptied. Imagine a library that never lets you return a book. Every book you've ever opened is still sitting open on the table, forever, cluttering the room. Now imagine trying to find one specific sentence in that room. That was S's daily reality. Here's the part that surprised Luria the most. Remember earlier, I said there was one thing S could never learn to do. It wasn't memorizing. It was the opposite skill, understanding. S struggled badly with anything abstract, metaphors, proverbs, even simple stories with a moral. Read him a sentence like, "Time flies," and he wouldn't understand the phrase. He'd just picture a literal clock, sprouting wings. Because to understand an idea, your brain has to do something S's brain refused to do. Forget the details and keep only the meaning. You don't remember every word of a conversation you had last year. You remember the feeling of it, the gist. That forgetting isn't a failure of memory. It's a filter. And it's how the human brain builds understanding out of noise. S never got that filter. So he lived in a permanent flood of raw detail with no way to compress any of it into meaning. He couldn't recognize faces well, because every time he saw someone, their expression was slightly different. And to him, that made them a completely new face each time. He struggled to hold a job, to follow simple stories, to have an ordinary conversation without drowning in the specifics of every word. As the years went on, Luria's notes describe a man who grew increasingly exhausted and increasingly isolated. S tried everything to force himself to forget. He wrote memories down on paper and burned them, hoping that if the ink disappeared, the memory would too. It never worked. He could still see the page, perfectly, in his mind. Luria's book about him wasn't called The Man with the Perfect Memory. He called it The Mind of a Mnemonist. Because by the end, it wasn't really a story about remembering. It was a story about a man who could never, ever rest. We spend our whole lives annoyed at forgetting. We forget where we put our keys. We forget people's names 2 seconds after hearing them. We forget the exact words of an argument, or a joke, or a lecture. It feels like a flaw. But S's life suggests the opposite. Forgetting is not your brain failing you. It's your brain protecting you. It clears space for meaning. It lets you compress 1,000 moments into a single feeling. It lets you move forward instead of drowning in every detail of everywhere you've already been. The man who could never forget didn't get a superpower. He got a mind with no floor to stand on, because everything was equally, exhaustingly present all the time. So the next time you forget something small, maybe don't be so angry at your brain. It's not broken. It's just doing you a favor. Forgetting is a feature, not a bug.